Hello everyone. Welcome to the session and thank you for your patience, those of you joining us live. I just got things situated, and just as a quick heads up, since this is live and there are no retakes, if someone can go ahead and jump into the chat and let me know that I'm coming in clearly, feel free to let me know where you guys are tuning in from, and we'll get rolling from there. Super psyched to be chatting with you guys a little bit about overcoming mental inertia in GMAT Critical Reasoning. So yeah, and I will say, as a quick aside, I actually have another video that's up on a previous GMAT Club series that deals with assumption questions a little more directly. We won't be as directly attacking that question type today, although we'll cover some kind of tangent concepts. And then, awesome, great, thank you guys so much for the clarification there. And then again, you're welcome to check that video out. I'll link it for you toward the end of the session. And I'll be hanging out for a little bit of Q&A at the close of the lesson. So if you guys have any big picture questions around how to be attacking particular CR question types, or really anything else GMAT related, definitely feel free to let me know. Stay tuned and I'd be happy to address those questions there. So if you looked at this title and you were thinking, oh, well, you know, like mental inertia must mean something along the lines of kind of either test anxiety or test fatigue, stay tuned. That is actually not what we're going to be covering today, but I'll be back with GMAT Club on March 10th, addressing some bigger picture strategies concerning pacing, combating fatigue on the test, all that jazz. Today, we're actually going to be talking about a really common way that the GMAT will abstract questions in critical reasoning by using our mental inertia against us. And actually, before we go ahead and dig in and talk about what the heck it is I mean by mental inertia, I want us to do a little bit of something that we cover a lot in our class, which is learning by doing. I want to throw you guys into the weeds on a question, see how you fare, and then we're going to follow up with takeaways and really dive a little more into what I mean by this concept of mental inertia. And I'd like to do that in the context of a quick question. Now, we have a poll set up for you guys here, so feel free to respond in that poll. We'll have the link coming up in just a moment for it so that we don't spoil too much of the direction you guys are going with this question. Let's go ahead and take 2 minutes on our own to dig in to see how we address this question with really no prefacing, and then we're going to circle back, talk about what it is I mean by this point of mental inertia and how it applies in this particular example. So go ahead, take 2 and respond in the polls. I'll have a link in the chat in just a moment. right, let's go ahead and talk about it. And I will say, overwhelmingly on this question, quite a few of you fell into what I would argue is the most convincing trap answer that's set up for this particular example. Because those of you who chose it, answer choice A is not our correct answer here, but we're going to talk a little bit about why. So if I'm looking at this question structure, first and foremost, I want to make sure we've got a really solid read on what the question type at hand looks like and how to strategically attack it. Because we want to make sure that we know what our objective is on a question by question basis, and we do that by recognizing what the question's asking us to do. So here we've got a best completes the passage question. And the tricky thing with our best completes the passage questions is that they could feasibly be asking us to look at a number of different things. They may ask us to draw our own conclusion if what seems to come before provides premises or evidence. Or they may ask us to strengthen a particular conclusion or a particular argument if what follows appears as though it should itself be a premise. So let's think about what context we have here that lets us know how we ought to be filling in the blanks. Basically, what question structure it is we're looking at here. So if we're told, in testing for food allergies, a false positive occurs when a person is said to be allergic, when they're actually not. False negatives, the other way around. To most accurately determine food allergies, a physician should use the test that gives the smallest percentage of false negative results because. So what does this term because tell us that we should be doing here to kind of fill in the blanks? The term because here. Are we looking to draw a conclusion? Are we looking to strengthen an existing conclusion? And yeah, we haven't had a full-fledged conversation around what the various question structures we might expect to see are, but I know my folks from GMAT Club generally have a lot of previous exposure to the various varieties of critical reasoning questions we can encounter. So what are we looking at here? Anyone want to weigh in? So if we have because blank, basically what we're filling in the blanks with is a premise that ought to strengthen the existing conclusion here that to most accurately determine food allergies, a physician should use the test that gives the smallest percentage of false negative results. So yeah, we're looking to strengthen the existing conclusion, right? So if we're looking to strengthen the existing conclusion, we want an answer choice that strengthens the idea that using the test that gives the smallest percentage of false negative results ought to most accurately determine food allergies. Now, many of you guys, yeah, we're looking for a premise, for an explanation. Perfect. Love it, guys. Thanks for the participation there. So if that's the situation at hand, if that's what we're looking to accomplish here, well, let's talk a little bit about, and it doesn't seem like my pen's working here, about answer choice A. Some food allergies cause reactions severe enough to be life-threatening. So answer choice A, and let's say answer choice C, right? In diagnosing food allergies, it's important to be as thorough as possible since most people with one known allergy have other undiscovered allergies. We had a couple of folks who leaned toward answer choice A and answer choice C, A in particular. But what's problematic about these answer options? If our conclusion is that we're trying to most accurately determine food allergies. Anyone have thoughts for me there? If we're trying to most accurately determine food allergies. Well, right off the bat, many of you guys might read through this question and say, hey, I know a little something about food allergies. Even if I don't have a food allergy, I probably know somebody else who does. And so right off the bat, when we hear food allergies and we hear this kind of false negative, well, we want to make sure that we don't not know about an allergy that we have because that's dangerous. And so our mind immediately wants to route to the danger involved in false negative results. But is danger really what we're looking at? No, Yerme tells us that's irrelevant to us here. It doesn't matter the danger level. That wasn't what the argument asked us to address. The argument asked us to address accuracy, to most accurately determine food allergies. So we need the answer choice that addresses accuracy. here, answer choice A, answer choice C certainly give us good reason to believe that false negative results are dangerous, but that was totally irrelevant to what we were looking for here. That wasn't what we were tasked to take a look at. So yeah, a couple of you guys very much on the right track here. No one was really all that convinced by B or D, right? So none of the tests for food allergies have lasting side effects. Pretty out of scope, doesn't matter to us contextually here. Whether the proportion of tests that don't provide a clear result is the same across the board, well, something being the same across the board couldn't possibly indicate to us a preference one way or the other. So by default, we're left with answer option E, but let's talk about why it's our correct answer. All tests for food allergies have the same proportion of false positive results. So if we're trying to maximize our accuracy here, if we want to minimize the error that we have in addressing food allergies, well, there are two ways that we can err, right? We could have a false positive or we could have a false negative. We could think there's an allergy when there isn't, or we could think there isn't an allergy when actually there is. And in this case, if all tests for food allergies are the same across the board for false positive results, if they're the same in one of those types of errors, then it makes sense that we would want to minimize, that we would want to mitigate the other option, the false negative. So here, what was tricky about this question and why overwhelmingly the polls didn't reflect the correct answer as the most frequently chosen one is that it's really easy on topics we do happen to know a little something about to let our previous encounters with that material, our previous kind of bias around that content area, sway us away from what the actual argument at hand is giving us. And so you may have seen in the description, we get this all the time to where students will very confidently answer questions wrong. They'll be certain they're on the right track. And in watching you guys in the polls, many of you were in a position to where you chose A in the first like 20 or 30 seconds, and you were ready to go. But what's tricky here is that we needed to make sure we knew the question type we were being asked, in this case, a strengthen question. We were asked to strengthen an existing conclusion or plan of action. And we need to make sure what that plan of action or conclusion is that we're trying to strengthen here. In this case, it's accuracy. The danger involved in a false negative was totally irrelevant to us here, even though it's where our mind most directly wanted to wander. So yeah, love the communication in the chat on this one. Basically, well, we've got two ways that we could be wrong, false positives and false negatives. And if the positives are the same across the board, then we minimize our overall error by minimizing the negatives. Awesome, very nicely done. Jump in and let me know if you guys have questions on this particular example. Like I mentioned, I did kind of throw you into the weeds a little bit on this one, but it's because I wanted to kind of lead the way. I'm having all sorts of strange tech weirdness this time. I wanted to lead the way into what this concept mental inertia is. Sure, I'll take us a quick step back, Jason, because I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. So with answer choice E, if we're in a position, again, bearing in mind that we're completing the passage with a premise supporting the existing conclusion or plan of action. With me so far? That we've basically taken a step further in the question style we're looking at, right? So if we keep that in mind, right, if we're trying to strengthen the existing conclusion, well, then we're looking for something that adds validity to the idea that we minimize our error, that we most accurately determine food allergies if we choose the tests that give the smallest percentage of false negatives. With me on that point? So if it is true, if we take this new factual piece of information into account, if it's true that all tests for food allergies have the same proportion of false positive results, this gives us really good reason to believe that we can minimize our error, that we can maximize our accuracy by choosing the test that has the smallest percentage of false negative results. Basically, if they're the same across the board in one of the ways that they can be wrong and one of the errors that could occur, we want to minimize the other error to maximize accuracy. Is that making a little more sense, Jason? If not, jump in and let me know. Hopefully my dear smartboard will catch up to speed with me on the technology front here, but essentially on the mental inertia front, what we mean with mental inertia, and it's actually most commonly applied in kind of the science field. And it's this idea that it's this basis that prevents, in most cases, a scientist, in your case, you are the scientist, right? GMAT test takers, from taking kind of the most productive steps and the most clear path toward adaptive reasoning. Basically, it's the error toward wanting to stick with what we know or currently understand about a particular topic. And so we'll want to make sure we keep this in mind. And yes, the rest of the lesson is going to be a little bit of hand-holding with that in mind, because now you guys know to look out for the potential that mental inertia is in your way. But I want us to go through a couple more examples of how we can recognize the potential for mental inertia and be a step ahead of it. We're going to take a look at it in the context of this next example. Oh, that's super strange. In the context of this next example, and I want to see where you guys get with this one. Again, we're kind of hand-holding through this. We know to look out for mental inertia. We know to look out for our kind of preconceived direction on the question. So with that in mind, we'll want to make sure we're taking a moment to recognize the question at hand, recognize the given argument, and address that question without getting too caught up along the way with convincing wrong answers. Let me just give it one more try and see. Yeah, I'm having some serious weirdness, guys. Thank you for your patience on the technology front here. Well, we'll see. We'll roll with it. All right, go ahead, take 2 minutes to lead the way on this next one, and then we will see where to go from there. All right, so this is super encouraging stuff because with a little bit of direction on kind of what to look out for in the field of mental inertia, we've gotten, in many cases, very much on the right track with this question. So let's talk a little bit about why, how, and how to route past some of the convincing wrong answers set up in this particular structure. So here we're asked, which one of the following employee behaviors most clearly violates the company policy cited above? So if we're violating the company policy cited above, and our policy tells us that an employee must be impartial, particularly when dealing with family matters, and that this obligation extends to all aspects of the job, including hiring, firing, etc., right? So if we're looking to be impartial, our mind, in many cases, will immediately route to nepotism, right? We're thinking about impartiality and we're saying, wait a second, I've been in a workforce before where people weren't quite impartial concerning family members, and they favored their family members above and beyond other employees. And so immediately that's where our mind wants to route on this particular question. But let's keep in mind that impartiality can mean a number of different things. It's not specifically limited to nepotism here. So yeah, a lot of folks on the right track in this case. I'm actually going to reverse order this next one. So with answer choice E, promoting a family member over another employee in the company, does this necessarily violate company policy? Is this a clear violation? Anyone have thoughts for me here? So promoting a family member over another employee in the company is certainly not a clear violation, or at least not necessarily, right? Because I could be in a position where that family member is the most viable candidate, right? So where they're the person who deserves that promotion. And so answer choice E is not inherently a clear violation of this policy. And if I think to the same thing in answer option D, repeatedly refusing to advance an employee, claiming that he has sometimes skipped work and that his work has been sloppy, even though no such instances have occurred for over 2 years, yeah, once again, we're in a position where this does not inherently dictate any sort of any sort of partiality, right? This could still be an impartial decision. Maybe this person has decided to refuse to advance all sorts of employees, regardless of their familial status. And if I look to answer option C, once again, for precisely the same reason, we saw that earlier answer option E, eliminated. Never firing a family member, even though 3 of one's siblings work under one's supervision and authority. Well, that's not inherently a breach of this policy either, right? Once again, well, maybe we're in a position where none of those family members deserve to be fired. So this isn't a clear violation of policy, nor is receiving over 100 complaints about the service of one's office and sending a product to all those who complain, including their mother. Well, first of all, that's not great support from your mom's perspective, but it's also not a clear violation of policy. In fact, extending precisely the same protocol to everyone involved would be compliant with this policy. So as many of you guys mentioned, what we're left now is answer choice A. And answer choice A, despite the fact that it chose to take a totally different view or a totally different direction from what we were anticipating, is precisely what we need here. Refusing to hire any of one's 5 siblings, even though they're each more qualified than any other applicant. Well, if they're more qualified and you're not hiring them just because they're family, that's not being impartial regarding family matters. That's a clear breach, a clear violation of this policy. So yeah, you guys are absolutely on the right track here. And one thing I would note and get in the habit of looking out for in these cases is that, it's easy when I say, hey, I'm going to try to toss you some questions that will task you to use this mental inertia and to be a step ahead of it, to be on the lookout for it. But this becomes all the more challenging when you're in practice test conditions and when you're on test day and you aren't inherently given that guidance or that step forward. So we want to make sure, even in those cases, that we'd be in a position where we could recognize what makes wrong answers convincing, but also what makes them definitively wrong. right? So in this case, so refusing to advance an employee without a valid reason is a violation, isn't it? So not according to the clear indication of what we have across the way here. So basically, we need to be impartial. There is nothing about, although I'd argue, Jason, to your point, that answer choice D is one of our more convincing wrong answers for those of you who didn't get caught up in the mental inertia of this question. But answer choice D, repeatedly refusing to advance an employee, we don't know that this is an inherently biased or partial decision. This could be how this manager interacts with everyone. Maybe they're just kind of a jerk and they don't want to see other people succeed. Who knows? But it doesn't inherently kind of go against this need for impartiality, particularly when dealing with family members. So yeah, pretty tricky, and I would argue this question has a decent set of convincing wrong answers, right? Answers that are reasonable to be chosen. And so I always love hearing from students this idea of like, oh, I know I'm close because I narrowed down to 2 and I picked the wrong answer between the 2. But keep in mind that we're trying to break things down via a number of different avenues of convincing wrong answers. And so, you know, narrowing down to 2 but choosing the wrong one may not inherently mean that you were 99% of the way there, but what it does mean is it gives us an indication on what types of wrong answers you find convincing. And if you get in the habit of logging, keeping track of, reflecting on those error types, it can help you to be a step ahead the next time around. Yeah, so question is, yeah, by design, Oliver, is intentionally misleading since it's suggesting that being a family member would be favorable as opposed to the opposite. But whether it was favorable or unfavorable, it's still going to be a violation of that policy. So again, we want to make sure that if we do have previous exposure to or interactions with the topic area at hand, we don't let that overpower our normal, unskewed analysis of the argument. So again, we want to be really careful to start broad in that analysis and to be able to kind of narrow in or filter in from there on what's relevant on a question by question basis. Because being too quick or too liberal to kind of paraphrase the information away from what the actual argument gave us can put us in a position where it takes us really powerfully the wrong direction or toward a convincing wrong answer, and it can hinder our ability to see the correct answer even when it's right in front of us. Yeah, so again, yeah, perfect. I love the continued kind of conversation around how you reason through, how you used process of elimination on these questions, because again, process of elimination is absolutely our friend on GMAT Verbal. In many cases, even if the correct answer doesn't jump right off the page or right off the screen at you, if you can find 4 answers that are definitively wrong for some reason, you can arrive confidently at that correct one. So I love seeing that conversation in the chat as well. All right, let's take a look at another. So once again, I want to let you guys lead the way. I want you to see by starting with a very, again, question-forward approach. Seeing if you can route through and understand what makes wrong answers convincing in this case, and trust in the approach that you take into each and every critical reasoning question type to lead you the correct direction on this question. So how do we overcome mental inertia and inference questions when 2 options look equally good? Great question, and actually, we're taking a look more directly at an inference question right now, and it is structure. Inference questions have the potential to be super formulaic question types, and they're super formulaic because 100% of the time, our correct answer is the answer that is guaranteed to be true on the basis of the premises, the information we're given above, which means convincing wrong answers are any given answer choice that could be false based on the information above. So even if it's likely to be true, even if it seems aligned with the rest of the argument, even if it seems like it would make sense to be true, as soon as you test it to this idea of, well, could it be false according to the information above? If it could, we can use process of elimination. And you'll find that when 2 options look equally good, and I want to kind of pick at that wording a little bit and see what you mean with this, because there are two ways we can interpret this idea of equally good. Equally good can mean they look really similar, and if they look really similar, we want to be really careful. We want to be really cautious and suspicious of that answer option, because when two answer choices sound synonymous, sound the same, there's a way better chance they're both incorrect answers, because they can't both feasibly be the correct answer. Now, if your inference answer options both sound good, but for totally different reasons, that's when we want to key in and look out for things like precision in language. How does the language or the extent of the wording that they've used impact whether or not that answer is guaranteed to be true or could be false? So I'm actually going to let you lead the way on that concept in this question that I'm sure half of you guys are already there on at this point. But let's go ahead and take a little bit of time on our own once again. Go ahead and take 2 minutes on this one and see if you can use what I just mentioned around taking a formulaic approach through this particular example to eliminate 4 wrong answers and arrive at the correct one. All right, let's go ahead and go through it. So we've got a bit of a mixed opinions on this one as well, although a lot of folks on the right track. So if we start to dig into kind of what's going on in this question, we're asked which of the following can be logically inferred based on the statement above, so we know we're looking at an inference question, right? And if we recognize that we're looking at an inference question, to the point that I made with Kranthi earlier, inference questions are very formulaic question structures because we can use this process of elimination to eliminate any answer option that could be false and arrive at the single answer that is guaranteed to be true based on the premises, the factual information given to us above. So if we've got all this factual information given to us above, we're told there are community leaders as well as ex-convicts who are successful in business. And we're told that all people who are successful in business are invited to join the Raynard Club. So if we take these answer options in order, taking all of this information as true, as factual information, are we guaranteed that all who are encouraged to join the Raynard Club are successful in business? Is this something that's guaranteed to be true based on the truth of the information above? All who are encouraged to join the Raynard Club are successful in business. Now, statistically, this was the most chosen wrong answer here. And it tends to be pretty much anytime I talk through this question with students. Because we read through this STEM and it just sounds like this Raynard Club is such an exclusive place for just those who are, up and coming and successful in business. But there's no indication in the STEM that that's the case, right? We could be in a position to where, everybody who's invited to join, here, let me see if I can get this fixed. Everybody who's invited to join is successful in business, and of those, well, some of them are community leaders and some of them are ex-convicts. But couldn't we also be in a position to where we have these people who are successful in business and they're just one small portion of the total of folks who are invited to join? Maybe this isn't an exclusive club at all. Perhaps this is a club to where everyone gets an invite in the mail and 100% of people are invited to join. We're never given any indication here about who isn't invited to join. We could be in a position where it's exclusive and it's just those who do well in business, but we could also be equally as likely to be in a position to where everyone's invited and it's not an exclusive club by any means. So answer choice A is not guaranteed to be true. Could be true, but it's not guaranteed, which means it's means for elimination. If we look to answer option B, all who are encouraged to join the Raynard Club are community leaders or ex-convicts. Do we know that this is true? Is this guaranteed to be true based on the information above? If we take all of our factual information up top as true, do we know that everyone who's encouraged to join the Raynard Club is a community leader or an ex-convict? Well, for kind of the same reason we just mentioned above, we could be in a position to where everybody who's successful in business falls in one of those two categories, and those are the only people invited, but we could also be in a position to where everyone's invited. So B is definitely out of the mix as well. And with C, some who are encouraged to join the Raynard Club are not community leaders or ex-convicts. I actually just explained what makes C means for elimination as well. Remember, I mentioned it could be non-exclusive and everyone in the world can join, or we could be in a position to where it's just those who are successful in business, and all of those successful in business fall into one of these two pools. So answer choice C is out of the mix because despite the fact that it could be true, it's not guaranteed to be true. And for those of you, we got a lot of folks on the right track now. Even if originally you were leaning a different direction, Dinesh is exactly correct. Our correct answer here is D. D tells us some ex-convicts are encouraged to join the Raynard Club. The word some literally just means at least one. It's anywhere from one to all. So are we guaranteed that some ex-convicts are encouraged to join the Raynard Club? Sure we are. We're told there are ex-convicts who are successful in business, and all people successful in business are invited to join. So at a bare minimum, the ex-convicts who are successful in business are invited to join. Answer choice D is guaranteed to be true. So very nicely done, guys. And again, if we use the same line of reasoning we used to eliminate answer choices A, B, and C, if we reason through the various situations that could fall under the information we've been given, well, we're not guaranteed that some ex-convicts are not encouraged. Again, we could be in a position to where absolutely everybody is encouraged or invited to join. Only answer choice D is guaranteed to be true, even though, again, to Kranti's earlier point, even though many of these other answer choices could be true, or might even be likely to be true. If they could be false, we can eliminate. So for those of you who are familiar with, say, the negation technique in assumption questions in critical reasoning, a very similar kind of formulaic approach can work its way into how we think about inference questions. Because as soon as an answer option could be false, it is no longer in the running as a correct answer for an inference question. Very nicely done, guys. Jump in and let me know if you have questions on this one. I have one more I want us to go through, and then we'll open things up to some bigger picture questions. And again, the big picture here, outside of just looking out for mental inertia and understanding what makes wrong answers wrong, and also what makes them convincing, is this idea that we can build a strong base, a strong foundation in understanding formulaically how to approach each and every critical reasoning question type. And if we know how to do that, right, if we know that that's the case, well, then we can route past the potential that mental inertia and many of the other common pitfalls we can encounter can steer us wrong. Okay, so why is C wrong? Let's talk about it, Creedy. So if we go back to answer option C, some who are encouraged to join the Raynard Club are not community leaders or ex-convicts. We are not guaranteed that that's the case. It certainly could be. Remember, exactly what you're saying is correct. Some might be outside of those two categories, but is it guaranteed that they fall outside of those two categories? Yeah, it's not a must-be true scenario, as Ashar tells us. So in this case, even though it might be the case that some of them could be not community leaders, not ex-convicts, neither of the two, it's not guaranteed. We could be in a position to where 100% of the people invited to join fall under one of those two categories. Does that make a little more sense, Creedy? If not, or if so, let me know. Because again, the key here is not to think about whether or not it's likely to be true or this might be true. We're trying to find the answer choice that must be true, that is guaranteed based on the truth of the information above, and only answer option D here complies with that parameter. All right, let me know if that's making a little more sense. Again, the key here is the more formulaic we can be on question structures to where we can recognize that there's a very specific approach. We have very specific elements we look for and we look out for in each and every one of our critical reasoning question structures. In this case, inferences, you should look forward to seeing on test day. Inferences should be like a bread and butter question type that you look forward to seeing as soon as you know this formulaic approach, because you can use this very clear process of elimination to confidently arrive at the correct answer. So again, if I circle back to all of my answer options over here, well, none of my other answers are guaranteed to be true. And I will say answer choice A tends to be the wrong answer that's most frequently chosen here. So to Jason's point, a couple of you guys earlier, you're not off base. A lot of folks tend us that direction. Yeah. So in this case, there's a huge difference in language. There's a huge difference in meaning between saying all people successful in business are invited to join and all invited or encouraged to join are successful in business. Just because A leads to B doesn't mean that B leads to A. Just because all men are mortal doesn't mean that all mortal beings are automatically men. Does that make sense? So line of reasoning, and if you've gone through like a logical symbolism class at any point, you may have encountered this kind of formulaic style of thinking through these questions. But here, just because all the people who are successful in business are invited to join doesn't mean that those are the only people invited to join. All right, welcome those of you who are chiming in a little bit later. We are moving through our final couple of examples, but by all means, this video will be available for viewing later. Chime in, jump into the chat, ask questions as you have them, and we've got one more example to go through. Once again, I want to let you guys lead the way here, so let's take one more time, 2 minutes, to go ahead and go through. Again, we've got, if the school's administrator's findings are correct, which of the following can be concluded on the basis of those findings? So what question type are we looking at once again? Good, yeah, that's exactly right, Diksha. Yeah, you're exactly correct there. So what question structure do we have here? Because this is going to give us a really good opportunity to reinforce all the stuff we were just talking about. The wording is notably different, but once again, we're drawing a conclusion on the basis of existing evidence, of existing premises. So Lax Tutor is exactly right. We've got another inference question. So go ahead, take 2 minutes, lead the way through this one, see where you get, toss your answers into the polls, and then we'll talk about it together. All right, let's go ahead and talk about it. And for those of you who maybe weren't 100% certain, but were deliberating between two options or had a particular leaning, feel free to jump into the chat with those thoughts at this point. But I will say, we once again had a bit of disagreement across our answer options here. So let's talk a little bit around how we can use this formulaic inference-based structure to start to draw conclusions. So we're saying if the school administrator's findings are correct, so assuming all the information above is factual, correct information, which of the following can be concluded, right? So we're looking for the answer that is guaranteed to be true by eliminating answer options that could be false. So if I look through my answer options here, we've got the number of 14-year-olds in Britain who are considered gifted. That is higher than 90% of their peers on the mandatory secondary school entrance exam has increased steadily over the past decade. Now, right off the bat, students will usually gear one of two ways if mental inertia takes over in their questions. They'll either go, oh, well, if the gifted students, the number of gifted students have increased, well then either we're in a position to where maybe the standards have decreased, it's easier to get better grades, or maybe we're in a position to where the quality of education has increased in some regard. But why are those lines of thinking incorrect when it comes to what this argument is giving us? Why doesn't that make sense? Why wouldn't we use an answer like there has been at least some improvement in British education? Or that, again, preparation for this exam has improved. Why aren't these viable correct answers? Someone talk to me a little bit here. Well, are we guaranteed that there's been some improvement in education, or even that there's been an improvement for the exam itself? Good, so this is, yes, I love this. So you guys are exactly on the right track here. This is testing us on recognizing the type of data we've been given here. Yeah, higher than 90% of their peers, well, that's a percentile-based answer, right? The top 10% is never going to change or increase in number based on how well students as a whole perform. Yeah. So in this case, we're not guaranteed there's been at least some improvement in education. Education could have gone up or it could have gone down. There's nothing here that dictates that the top 10% is a larger number because people perform better. That 10% is always a percent of a particular base. So in order for 10% of some number to have become larger, what do we know about that number we're taking the 10% of? If we're saying, hey, the top 10% has increased in number, what do we know about the base that we're taking that 10% of? Yeah, it's a pretty open-ended question, but I think you guys got it. So in order for the top 10% of folks who take this exam to have increased, the number of students taking the exam has to have increased. So answer choice C, as a lot of you guys mentioned, is the only feasible answer here, right? The number of British 14-year-olds taking the exam has increased in the past decade, because in order for 10% of a total to get bigger, the total must have gotten bigger. So again, we're in this position to where mental inertia wants us to look at this and say, well, if people are performing better, right, we basically paraphrase away the true meaning of this argument. We say, if people are performing better, they must be spending more time preparing, or they must be improving education as a whole. But the argument didn't say that. The argument told us that the top 10%, the number that makes up that top 10%, has gotten bigger, which means the base we're applying the percent to, as Ashar mentions, you're exactly correct, must have gotten larger. Only answer choice C is guaranteed to be true. And you know what? It probably wasn't the first thing that came to mind if you didn't look at this question and think, there's some data here. I want to be scrutinous of it. I want to be careful of it. Now, the answers I haven't addressed weren't really frequently occurring answers. Again, the percentage of British 14-year-olds who are considered gifted has increased as a percentage of the total population. We're in a position where they told us what gifted means. It means the top 10%. That hasn't changed or gone anywhere. Yeah, so this 90%, 10% we're given, we need to pay attention to. And to your point, it's really easy to overlook data-driven errors, because when we talk mental inertia, in many cases, our brains have been kind of wired to accept statistical evidence or data as fact, and to read it and interpret it exactly the same way that they've presented it. But keep in mind that data can be misleading, or it can take us a different direction than the one we initially think about or think to apply. So we want to look out for the potential that mental inertia kind of sneaks its way into data-driven questions. And as a general rule of thumb, anytime you see any sort of data, and actually, as another quick aside, this was not intentional, but if you find that you run into trouble with this question type, I do have another video with our GMAT Club series that deals specifically with attacking data in critical reasoning questions. And I'll link that one as well for you guys. But the key here is anytime you've got numeric concepts, percents, ratios, values, averages, whatever that numeric concept may be, pay attention to it, be scrutinous of it, and think about how that numeric concept may mean something a little bit different from what first meets the eye. So, isn't there a possibility that with the same base we can get a bigger number of kids in the top 10%? Scoring higher than 90% of their peers or in the top 10% would be the same across the board outside of the score markers for people who score the same, right? But a question will not get into that minutia of the concept itself. So yeah, in this case, in order for 10% of a particular value to become a larger number, the base we're applying that percent to will need to have gotten larger. Great question though. All right, so with that in mind, we went through a couple sample questions. There's plenty more out there on the GMAT Club forum and any other resource you might seek out concerning overcoming this point of mental inertia. But the couple of big picture takeaways I'm hoping that you guys gather here. First and foremost, make sure that when you're going through critical reasoning, you are question focused, that you're focused in on identifying the question structure at hand and the argument at hand so that you can answer the question that's being asked and you can address the argument you're being presented with. Rather than what many students will do, especially in content areas that feel somewhat familiar, is they'll paraphrase away the true meaning of the argument and they'll put it in their own words, but it washes away the inherent gap in reasoning or the inherent kind of element of that argument that makes the question tick. So we want to be really careful to make sure that we're addressing the argument in their words when we kind of preempt or analyze a particular question. And we want to keep in mind that the correct answer might not take the direction you chose to develop out or you chose to preempt. So we want to start broad. Use process of elimination to eliminate obviously incorrect answers and then see how to proceed from there. And we also want to be sure that we're building structure into that approach. So we saw with inference questions that a little bit of structure, that asking ourselves that same question of, does this comply with a must be true? Does it have to be true? Is it guaranteed based on the information above? Well, this allowed us to very strategically use process of elimination to consistently arrive at the correct answer. And again, it also allows us to basically leverage what we do well in easy examples into success on higher level questions, on more challenging examples that maybe sneak a little mental inertia or a challenging data point into the mix. And ultimately, keep in mind, yeah, I kind of handheld you through this lesson. You know, the accuracy was a little bit off on question 1. I introduced you to what the topic area at hand was, and then you guys began to perform exceptionally well at identifying what the question was asking us to do and what the mental inertia at play looked like. But when you're going through questions on your own, you'll want to make sure that you can identify kind of the cues, the indicators on how to recognize mental inertia and its potential to apply itself. And one of the best ways you can do that is by making sure you're, again, very reflective in your practice and that you're looking for opportunities to understand not just why the correct answer is correct, but why wrong answers are wrong and why they were supposed to be convincing. Because even if they didn't convince you the first time around, recognizing the types of wrong answer structures the GMAT will present you with puts you in a better position to be a step ahead of it the next time around, even if you find that particular example a little more challenging. All right, thank you guys, those of you who've been with me from the start, hanging out that couple of minutes we got started late. Thank you for those of you who chimed in a little bit later on in the mix. That actually rounds out the formal content that we have for today, but if you guys have any questions for me, whether they relate to the questions we went through on the board or just bigger picture strategies concerning critical reasoning or concerning the GMAT as a whole, definitely feel free to let me know in the chat. For those of you who are not tuning in live, I do try to circle back and make sure that if you guys have lingering questions in just the regular comment functionality, I'm happy to address those as well. So feel free to drop a comment in with any questions you happen to have or ping me on GMAT Club. I will be back. I know someone asked this at the very beginning of the lesson. I will personally be back on March 10th to talk a little bit about pacing, bigger picture strategies and techniques. And then just kind of a more open format Q&A around best practices in preparing for the test. However, my colleague Anthony and some other folks on the Veritas Prep team will be back beginning next week to talk about some quantitative topics, so definitely feel free to stay tuned. And from my understanding, GMAT Club's got experts walking you through various elements of the MBA process or the GMAT test-taking process nearly every day for the next couple of weeks, so definitely feel free to take a look at the schedule and tune in. Thank you guys again so much for joining. Again, I'll be hanging out in the chat to answer any questions you might happen to have for me. Thanks for bearing with. I know the live format can tend to have a little bit of wonkiness on the technology front when it decides not to play fair. But thank you guys so much for joining. Hope to see you guys again in my next live webinar. And in the meantime, happy studying.